Love watching the numbers of people coming in. Okay.
Watch, mine is going to be 14 people.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. I am really grateful to be back with you tonight for the final session of our Fall Book Talk series. Don't worry, we have more programs coming in November. Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure to chat to everyone. We love to know who's with us. Let us know who you are, where you're coming in from today. Also put your questions there throughout the program and I'll try to bring them into our conversation. It has been 2 weeks since JWA's last book talk. It feels like the world has turned over since then. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge what a devastating and terrifying time this is for so many of us. And also that given that context, it feels particularly meaningful to gather together. I'm thinking back actually to the first book talk that we had in March of 2020 during the very first week of lockdown. We planned 3 book talks thinking that would get us through the pandemic. And here we are. But I'm remembering how powerful it was to be together virtually, to acknowledge our shared fear and pain, to offer support to one another in the context of learning, and to talk about how books and writing help us find and make meaning in our lives. And we've been doing that together, some of us nearly every week since then for more than 3.5 years. And I draw really incredible strength from all of you. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm not going to do my usual spiel about JWA, but suffice it to say that the book talks are just one piece of a very robust slate of work that we do. And I hope that you will check out jwa.org to learn more about our work and the full range of projects and resources that we offer. And one logistical note, if you would like captioning, you can click the button that says CC or show captions at the bottom and it should work for you. We can't turn it on for you, but you should be able to get it to work. Okay, I am really delighted to introduce our featured author for this evening. Marjorie Ingall is the co-author with Susan McCarthy of Sorry, 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 The Case for Good Apologies, and the co-creator of the apology watchdog site, sorrywatch.com. She's also the author of the fabulous book, Mama Knows Best, What Jewish Mothers Do to Raise Successful, Creative, Empathetic, Independent Children. She often writes about children's books for the New York Times Book Review. She's written for many other magazines and newspapers, including Tablet and The Forward. She was a columnist for both of those, as well as Town and Country, Glamour, Self, Ms., Elle, New York, and Newsweek. She was years ago, the senior writer and books editor at the late lamented Sassy magazine. Shout out to all the Gen X people who grew up with Sassy. It was really a highlight of my teen years. And we were just talking before we came on about Jen Richler and I about how sad we are that we didn't save them, which was really very stupid because they had a lot of wonderful wisdom and humor. Marjorie's also served on the Sidney Taylor Committee to select the best Jewish children's books, ghostwritten a memoir, worked on the startup team at the Oxygen TV network. She is a very productive and busy person. Welcome, Marjorie. So very happy to have you with us tonight.
Judith, I am so glad to be here. I'm such a huge JWA fan. And yeah, I've been looking forward to this. In a crappy time, this has been something I've been looking forward to.
I feel the same. So you have a very long history of apology expertise, more than a decade leading up to this book. So tell us a little bit about the start of this work, and then you can share a little bit of the book with us.
Yeah, so my co-author, Susan, who is a very long-time friend of mine, she may be the only writer who has been anthologized both in the Best American Humor Writing and the Best American Science Writing. She is the co-author of an internationally best-selling book about animal behavior. And she wrote, speaking of animal behavior, I think my cat, Vinny, may be making some cameo appearances during this. And she wrote a piece about, a certain piece about human behavior that ended up going viral about sorry if apologies. And she knew that I wrote about apologies every year first when I was a columnist for The Forward, and then when I was a columnist for Tablet. When we always start thinking about apologies at the high holidays, but maybe we should be thinking about them all the time. And I also had a child who all toddlers are feral, but mine was the most feral and was a total biter. She spent like all of pre-K in the consequences chair. And so I was thinking about how to teach someone to apologize a lot. And so in 2012, Susan suggested that we collaborate, knowing my interest in apology, on Sorry Watch. And at first we just made fun of like bad celebrity apologies, but then we started to get into more and more good apologies. And that was you had asked if I would read something, and that was going to be the section that I was going to read, a very quickie.
Yeah.
All right. So this is from the introduction, and this little section is called The Hideous Allure of Terrible Apologies and the Dynamic Power of Great Apologies. As Sorry Watch took off, people started sending us apologies and asking, nay, demanding that we parse them. We were led into controversies and subcultures we knew little or nothing about. Large animal vets, doomsday preppers, comedy tour organizers, drunken poets, Burning Man's sound camp organizers. It's been edifying. We marveled at the simplicity and effectiveness of the good apologies we saw, and were tempted to rant mouth-foamingly and often about the bad ones. Our furious tirades were frequently cathartic for us and tended to get more traffic than our level-headed, admiring posts. But we began feeling increasingly strongly about the need to praise those less frequent good ones. Starting in around 2016, when certain folks began insisting ever more loudly, both implicitly and explicitly, that apologies were a sign of weakness, we started seeing the need to promote good apologies as signs of strength and character. Sadly, there are tons of people who see the refusal to apologize as muscular and tough. In fact, it's the opposite. Apologizing means letting your best self crash through the wall of your own defensiveness like the Kool-Aid man. It takes real guts to apologize publicly and privately, and it takes valor to apologize to those with less status and power than you, especially when no one's making you do it. Apologizing well shows wisdom and honor. The aftermath of a good apology can improve the lives and spirits of everyone it touches. Everyone feels healed. This makes our planet a better place for everyone. We also began to see that an unsolicited, heartfelt apology is a potent thing. When you deliver a good apology, it can make you feel better about yourself and your own perceived past failings. It can make you feel a sense of release and redemption, and it can fill you with a sense of mission and purpose. When you receive a good apology, it can make you feel connected to the person who took the step of reaching out to you and risking rejection. It can make you feel seen. It can give you a small experience of justice. There is a plethora of research on how potent good apologies can be for the apologizer, for the recipient, and for the planet at large. Study after study in the fields of psychology, medicine, law, and management show that apologizing directly to those who are harmed has a huge positive impact. A good apology uplifts not just the recipient, but everyone the recipient tells. When you read about a beautiful apology on Facebook or hear about one in the media, it's almost as if you received that apology yourself. Good apologies have ripple effects. They make the world feel more humane.
And that is certainly something that we need more of now. And we're just coming out of the Jewish season of atonement. So sorries have definitely been on our mind. And one of the things I always think of at Yom Kippur is how, I think people who don't know that much about Yom Kippur or experience it from the outside often think it's like a apology-free card, right? Like, oh, you just atone and therefore you don't have to say apology. But actually, Yom Kippur only counts for apologies between you and God, and you actually still have to make your apologies to people in your life. And you said that you were sort of had your yearly apology beat in your Jewish journalism work. How did that influence your approach to Sorry Watch and to this book?
We started thinking, the book does address a lot of different faith traditions, attitudes towards apology and forgiveness. But a thing that I really like about Judaism is just what you said, that it's not just between you and God, it's between you and your fellow human beings. And in fact, God is not part of the picture when it comes to what you owe to your fellow human. I like this notion that apologies are acts, not words. That apologies, you know, you often see this cliche on social media about the best apology is changed behavior, but that's really true. And you know, we talk about some, you know, a thing that I like. We have a Maimonides quote on that there's more. If you want to do a search on sorrywatch.com, I do a bunch of Maimonides stuff. There's less of it in the book. But, you know, Maimonides talked about how saying you're sorry, but not doing the work to not repeat the offense is like entering a mikvah while holding a dead lizard in your hand. And Susan and I like to whisper when we hear an apology we know isn't going to result in any change. We like to say to each other, drop the reptile.
Yes, that is a very evocative image.
It is. It is. We Jews are colorful people.
Yeah. Oh, Maimonides. Well,
yeah, he was a great popularizer. A thing that, you know, is nice about Maimonides is he was always conscious of writing for an audience. And, you know, he was like, he was sort of, you know, in addition to being a great thinker, I often think about him as sort of like a popularizer, a popular journalist of his day, you know?
I love that. I hadn't thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense. So you identify 6.5 steps to a good apology. Can you walk us through what that would look like?
Yes. So these 6.5 steps, this is based on reading. Susan and I, as journalists, both tend to procrastinate by reading a ton of other people's studies and research and work. And it's fun to look at how well constructed a study is versus, you know, if you can see the agenda right out in the open. My husband, who is a data scientist, often says, you know, show me the results you want and I'll make a study to find them. So I think we're both pretty good at reading studies. So this is based on reading a whole lot of studies, and also the work of psychiatrist Aaron Lazar, who anybody who studies apology needs to, you know, credit his great book on apology, which really helped us think about these issues. Also Harriet Lerner, who's a psychotherapist who's wonderful on thinking about apologies and relationships. So getting to it, this works whether you are a head of state who has been partying during COVID and lying about it. This works if you're, you know, a 7-year-old who has chased a friend with a booger, a spouse who forgets to unload the dishwasher all the time, a corporation that has done something horrible. Number one is say you're sorry. Use the words, I'm sorry, or I apologize. Not, I regret. Regret is about how I feel, and apology is about how you feel. And I want to make you feel better when I apologize. Number two, for what you did. You have to name the thing, not that situation, not what happened last week. Names have power. And number three is show that you understand why what you did was hurtful. You know, it's not, again, when you articulate that, in some ways you'll find out, oh, the thing that I thought you were upset about is not what you were upset about. But unless you actually say the thing, you're not going to be able to show that you understand why you hurt the other person. Number four is be really careful about not making excuses. This is the hard one for me. I often think I'm offering an explanation, and it's really easy for that to shade into an excuse. A thing that you can do for that is practice. Like I call Susan and practice big apologies on her before I give them, or I deliver them to my cat, you know, just to have the practice of not starting to stammer over the explanation I think I'm giving. Number five, what steps are you taking to ensure that this won't happen again? Tell the other person why this won't recur. Tell them how you're going to drop the reptile. Number six is if you can make reparations, which isn't the case in every apology, then make reparations, even if that's just like, you know, I spilled wine on, you know, your coat, I'll pay for the dry cleaning. If you're a country, that may involve, you know, reparations for long-time historical wrongs. Reparations means different things in different contexts. And then there's an important half step, which is listen. Let the other person have their say. We are not crisis communications counselors, we're journalists, we aren't PR people. And it's funny to us that reporters call us about public apologies, even though, it's fun to talk about them. PR people often tell celebrities you have a golden hour in which to apologize. You have to get it out there right away. You have to change the narrative. And in real life, between you and me and real human beings, that's not the right way to go. Cynthia France is a researcher at Oberlin who studies the timing of apologies, and oftentimes it's better to wait a little. You have the time to think about what you did. The other person has the time to process exactly how and why they're upset. And you're more likely to apologize better if you think a little bit first and let the other person talk to you about it.
Right. So why is it so hard to apologize well? I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that it doesn't come easily to most people. What are some of the things that get in the way?
Our own human brains get in the way. One reason why we became more interested in talking about good apologies than bad ones is we started feeling a lot more charitable about how hard it is to deliver a good apology. And that is because of cognitive dissonance. Let me see if I can find this quote that I know I have on my computer about cognitive dissonance. Yeah, in Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, psychologists Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson wrote, "The mind wants to protect itself from the pain of dissonance with the balm of self-justification, but the soul wants to confess." So we are used to seeing ourselves as basically good people, the hero of our own story. If we didn't see ourselves that way, we wouldn't be able to function. I mean, it's a protective mechanism that has a good reason behind it. But that means when we apologize well, we have to acknowledge that we were the villain in someone else's story. Again, let me get you the quote from them. Self-justification not only minimizes our mistakes and bad decisions, it's also the reason that everyone can see a hypocrite in action except a hypocrite. We're all like, how can they not hear that that is a terrible apology? And yet, when it comes out of us, we're saying the exact same sorry if, sorry but, sorry you. And they said that the brain is designed with blind spots, optical and psychological, and one of its cleverest tricks is to confer on us the comforting delusion that we personally do not have any.
Right. And we hear this. I mean, I can think of a million examples, but especially when people, make that claim, like, this doesn't reflect who I am. It's like,
right, this is not who I am.
Right. Sorry, but actually everything reflects who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And those who know my heart know, well, I don't know your heart. All I see is what you do. And that's another thing I actually like about Judaism is, I remember when I was a little kid and Jimmy Carter said the thing about sitting in his heart by lusting after other women. I remember my mom having this really powerful conversation that made an impact on me as a little kid about, that's not really a Jewish thing to say, I sinned in my heart. We all have free will. And our tradition really talks about our behavior.
Right. And I think that question of sort of like, how do you, that gap, as you're saying, between sort of who you think you are and then what you're actually enacting in the world is
yeah. And I think it's important to remember, another phrase, we have these bad apology bingo cards that appear throughout the book. Where
the book is, I want to say to anyone who hasn't read the book, A, you should read the book, but B, the book is extremely funny. And I think that that's part of what is really important to remember. And, that like, apologies are a very serious thing, obviously. And they have, as you said at the beginning, like a lot of power. They really have this incredible power to actually like make the world way better and fix a lot of things about humankind. And humans mess them up all the time. And it's pretty funny to see how ridiculously people miss the mark in apologizing all the time. And you guys have a great sense of humor about
it. Yes, there we go. So one of the things that people say in bad apologies is nobody's perfect, which is absolutely true. It's just your particular incidence of imperfection, is not, we don't say that during our apology.
Right.
But it actually is super helpful for all of us to remember that nobody is perfect and to maybe come to each other with a little bit of charity that we all, I really liked I thought the TV show The Good Place was one of the great philosophical texts of our time. And Michael, the architect of the bad place, who's designed this hell but is trying to learn about what it takes to be better, says, what's important isn't whether you're good or bad, it's whether you're trying to do better today than you did yesterday. And I think that's super powerful. And if we could just all remember that, granted, there are plenty of bad faith apologies and we all recognize them, and there are gaslighting apologies, but sometimes when people deliver a crappy apology, they are open to doing better. Or when they don't apologize at all, but when you tell them they should be sorry, they sometimes can listen and grow and learn. And that's really important. And we are better off as human beings helping people do better than gotchaing them, calling them in rather than calling them out.
Yeah. And actually, one of the lines that I wrote down that you have in the book is apology plays an important part in turning call out culture into call in culture. Can you say more about what that means?
Yeah. The professor Loretta Ross at Smith College has written about how calling someone in allows them to sort of help be the architect of their own getting better at stuff, and calling them out isolates them in a corner and it's part of it. I think why I used to write a lot at Tablet about anti-bullying education and how a lot of it is bad because we really want to see the bully as other. And we are all capable of being the bully, and we are all capable of being the victim. And yeah, calling someone in means let's talk about how we can all do better. Right. And that's much more. I mean, shame is not a tool of education.
Right. And it's such an interesting thing because I think often when we think about, there's so many, bizarre apology things that happen on social media, right? That are just like disgusting and weird and sometimes hilarious. And you have in the book some great send-ups of those. But I think we often think about those as being kind of aligned with cancel culture, that, someone says something terrible online and then they dig themselves further into a hole and they get canceled over. But the truth is, if we're afraid of being canceled, it doesn't promote apologizing, because then people feel like they don't want to admit that they did something terrible, right. And so there is this weird dynamic that I think pursuing that line of critique can lead people to be more fearful about apologizing rather than kind of creating an environment where people feel like there's some encouragement to actually admit that they did something wrong and apologize.
Totally. I also am not entirely convinced that cancel culture is truly a thing in most cases. Like the people who scream the loudest about being canceled are the ones who somehow manage to still have these giant platforms. I mean, Louis C.K. is selling out, his comedy clubs. Mel Gibson, who, we all remember that anti-Semitic rant. I mean, he's still making movies. I might argue that cancellation for women tends to be a little more difficult than it is for men, but yeah.
So let's talk about some of the ways that gender shapes apologies.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things that we often hear that is sort of the, might be the first thing that comes to people's mind is just that women tend to apologize more than men. And you showed some really interesting studies that kind of complicate that story.
Yeah, there's a researcher named Karina Schumann who studies gender and apology, and her work is really fascinating. But so the first thing I would say is it is true, women apologize more than men do. But when men think they are wrong, they apologize as much as women do. Obviously, where we go with that is, maybe men should think they're wrong more. Maybe that's something we can do, is help them. I don't love the notion of policing women's speech, which is often what saying women apologize too much amounts to, is, okay, we're supposed to not use vocal fry, which is when you have the little bit of a, millennial Gen Z scratch in there. You're not supposed to use up talk, where you end a sentence with a question, whether it's a statement or not. You're not supposed, and you're not, and if you're a woman, you're not supposed to say sorry. You're supposed to say, No, you're not supposed to say, sorry, I'm late. You're supposed to say, thank you for waiting. No, you should say sorry when you're late. And I also feel like for women, the consequences of being deemed unapologetic, particularly for Black women, are really dire. And telling women not to apologize when apologies are often a strategy for just getting along in the world. And when, if you don't apologize, you're seen as a ball buster, a bitch. Like look at the way people really hated Hillary Clinton's speech patterns. And some of that was not deeming her sufficiently apologetic. So in general, I feel like talk how you talk. If I did have a really good question at an event in Evanston a few weeks ago where a woman said that she had an intern who apologized all the time, and the woman was spending so much time telling her intern not to apologize, and that it was clearly there was something there that the woman didn't feel entitled to take up space. And we talked about sassy in the beginning. A lot of times teenage girls don't feel that they have the right to take up space, and that's an issue to address. But policing someone's apologies and sorries is not great. The one thing that we looked at a bunch of things that executive coaches said about what to say instead of sorry, and the one thing that I really liked was, if you're at work, don't say sorry to bother you. When you need help from someone, say, is now a good time? Which I loved, because you're asking for what you need to do your job better, probably to make the other person look good. There's no sorry for that.
Yeah, and I think there are some helpful reframes to think about when sorries aren't necessary, but I also think you point out in the book that like there are some kinds of apologies, social apologies, which are often something that women do more and are actually a form of kindness. Like,
Yes.
in other words, like apologizing for things that aren't your fault, like I'm sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry that happened to you, or sorry you're having a hard time. And and sometimes people are like, oh, it's not your fault. It's like you can say sorry for things that aren't your fault.
Yeah, totally. Like it's called a phatic apology, PHATIC, when it's just an apology sort of as a bridge building thing. Sorry about the rain, sorry you broke your leg. It's not really helpful to be like, you didn't break my leg.
Right. Exactly. But I think also there's such a so much of what underlies the dynamics of apology is about power. And I think some of what is really gets in the way of people apologizing is that sense that apologizing is giving up power in some way. And that certainly plays out in the gender aspects of apology. It plays out in other kinds of power differentials too, race for sure also. And it was really interesting to read about the ways that, like, for women, apologizing can be more about, as you're saying, like bridge building, and there's more of a social component and less of a sense of like it's about losing face or something like that.
Men are, this is another Karina Schumann tidbit, is men are more likely to apologize to women than to other men. And that may be, as you say, because they see it as a little bit of giving away of power, and that's easier to do with women because that fundamentally you have more power when it comes to women. I don't know.
Right. And then it was also sad and ironic to read that women are less likely to be forgiven than men, which you would think, again, like if women start out with less power, it might be easier to forgive them. But no, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Nope. And there was a study about when women rejected a man, if the rejection was accompanied by a sorry, they were even angrier. So again, like, stop policing women's speech.
Right. And especially like because we know that sometimes, when women are navigating social situations around power, as you said, the consequences can be very high, right? Like, women might be in a case where they're breaking up with someone, saying sorry because they're afraid the person's going to hurt them. And, yes. So again, that idea that like apologizing can be a necessary strategy, or being apologetic, or kind of giving up your power in that way of being like, I don't know, maybe, the things that kind of go along with some of the critiques around over apologizing, that kind of tentativeness can be not a sign of women's, inability to talk
right.
strong, but like
It's a sign of
actually
social savvy.
right, exactly, being socially
Yeah.
sophisticated about what they're seeing in their encounters.
Yeah.
So I want to present a historical case study to you. I happened to find this as I was looking around on JWA's site, and I thought this was kind of fun because I could actually find the apology letter. So here's the case. It's May 1907. A woman named Bertha Rayner Frank, who happened to be the sister of a U.S. Senator, Isidore Rayner from Baltimore, was staying at a hotel in Atlantic City. Her family had stayed there before. She was already checked in. She was staying there. And then she went to reserve rooms for her nieces. And when she did that, the clerk asked her if her nieces were Hebrews, and then explained, we don't entertain Hebrews. So she left the hotel. Now, in 1907, this was not unusual for there to be hotels that discriminated against Jews and had policies that did not allow Jews to stay there. So this wasn't unusual. But this was a strange situation because she was already staying at the hotel, and she then spoke to the news about it. And mostly, I have to say, her descriptions of what happened they don't put her in the best light, because it seems she's mostly upset that the hotel would exclude Jews of her stature. She wasn't that surprised that they would exclude some Jews, but she was basically like, don't they recognize that I'm not like those Eastern European Jews who are distasteful? But anyway. So this ended up in the New York Times several times. And in fact, the New York Times published on May 21st, I think, they published the apology letter that she received from the hotel. And this is what it says. Dear Madam, as stated to you this morning when we called to see you upon your invitation, and when for the first time the writers heard from your lips the exact occurrence in our house last week, we desire to offer you our sincere apology for the discourtesy of our clerk in his conversation with you regarding additional accommodations for your friends. You were at the time a welcome guest in our house, as your family had been before. We regret exceedingly that you should have been given the impression that either you were not welcome or that your friends were not wanted. Regarding your published interviews, they constitute a public affront to the whole Jewish people, which no one knowing us personally will believe us capable of intending or countenancing. We ask that you give this letter the same publicity afforded your interviews. With sincere regret for the whole affair, we are, Madame, most respectfully, Josiah White and Sons, proprietors, Marlborough Blenheim.
Oh, Josiah, are you really most respectful? I don't think you are.
It does conclude by saying Mrs. Frank, who is now staying at the Palace Hotel in Atlantic City, said yesterday that the written apology was satisfactory and that the matter would be dropped. But of course, Sorry Watch gets the final.
Yes. And I would also add that if Mrs. What was her last name again?
Frank.
If Mrs. Frank was satisfied with the apology, we do not have the right to tell her she should not be. That Lisa Jobs wrote a book in which she forgave her father, Steve Jobs, for stuff that a lot of us would find unforgivable. If accepting an apology, even if we think it's a crap apology, makes someone feel good, not on us to tell them they shouldn't. Also not on us to tell someone they should accept an apology. Every decision is personal. But there was this is not who we are. There was, why I don't have a racist bone in my body. What else was in there? Sorry you were offended. There was a let's move on. All of those things are bad apology bingo cards, just written in slightly more florid Victorian language.
Yes, exactly. And then, of course,
I think you and I could easily list the ways in which that is not a good apology. But that was if you look on sorrywatch.com, if you search for Henry Ford, Henry Ford issued an apology to the Jews that is worse than that. But this notion of the formal language couching complete toxicity, that one's way worse.
Yeah,
but this wasn't great.
No, it's not great. So I guess
also, sorry for how you felt rather than sorry for what we did.
Yes, I'm sorry you misunderstood what we were saying. And they also try to
Right.
blame the clerk, you know, the
Yes,
owner is not really
yes,
taking responsibility there. And then of course at the end it's really about like, please publicize the apology, given that uh, you know, you publicized the bad thing that we
right,
did.
right. Um, but you know, one of the things that we do say is every you know, celebrities, politicians get caught all the time saying, you know, when Chris Christie closed that bridge in New Jersey as payback for a fight with a mayor of a town, he said in his apology that he had reached out to the mayor to apologize personally, and he had not. So one thing that, and it's so easy to get caught in those when you're a public figure. So I mean, to some degree, it's true that when you apologize or forgive privately, it's good to also do it publicly. This is not a problem most of us have.
Yes, no. Um, so you mentioned already that saying I regret is different than saying I apologize, because regretting centers your own feelings and
Yeah.
apologizing is focused on the other person. But you also talk a little bit about some of the differences between I apologize and I'm sorry. Can you parse that out a little bit?
Yes. My so a lot of it depends on the audience. One thing that's not good is I'd like to apologize, which is often a public statement. And it's funny because it's about you. And usually the person never gets to the actual, it's a semantic thing, but it's also a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is I'd like to apologize is not I apologize. Some people like I'm sorry because it's more homespun, it's more heartfelt sounding. But and I apologize sometimes can sound too formal to people. It can sound like it's a, a dictate from on high, something that you were forced to say. Um, there are, you know, we quote a linguist in the book who actually thinks I apologize is better because it's more because of that formality. But I honestly think it's about whatever you can make sound most like you.
Mm-hmm.
And which also brings up, you know, the delivery mechanism. You know, like some apologies, it's uncomfortable when you make them, if you, you know, I had a neighbor who locked herself out and leaned on the buzzer at 4 in the morning for the building, and I kind of stumbled down there and she was like, I feel terrible, I should die in a fire. And it's just like, shut up, let me go back to bed, I don't care about your feelings right now. um uh so sometimes the quick I'm sorry is good for a text when it's you just don't want to make a bigger deal out of something. It can be a quick face to face immediately. If I misgender someone right now, it's good for me to say, I'm sorry. I will work hard to get that right in the future. Not this whole thing that puts the other person in the position of having to apologize to you for your apology, you know, for you feeling uncomfortable. Oh, no, no, it's fine. Um, if something's really bad, a letter on paper, if you really want to apologize, that is potent. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
finding a stamp in this day and age, you know, somebody meant it if they went and they found the stationery. Often an email is good, but you never want to trap someone hearing an apology. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to get away from you if they don't want to hear it, which is their prerogative. We like to say apologies are mandatory, forgiveness is not.
Yes, and I was about to ask you about that. So let's talk about forgiveness and where it fits in or doesn't fit in.
Um, Forgiveness, you know, there's so much research on the health benefits of forgiveness. You know, good for your heart rate, good for your blood pressure, good for your sleep, good for your stress levels. But that's if if you can, if it is possible for you to forgive. There are things that are unforgivable. I think nobody would say to the victims of Harvey Weinstein that, you know, oh, you'd be better off if you could just forgive. And when somebody doesn't apologize authentically to you, no, you don't have to forgive. And sometimes there's this thing called spiritual bypassing, which is wanting to go right to the forgiveness without doing the hard work on both sides of getting to the forgiveness. Sometimes people urge, particularly within families, if there is one member of the family or some members of the family who are really uncomfortable with someone else being angry, even if it's for the right reasons or for good reasons. They want them to forgive because shalom bayit, because, no, they don't have to forgive if the person really wronged them. And where else was I going with this? That we have this societal addiction to forgiveness stories in which people with less power forgive people with more power. We love stories as an American culture. We love stories in which victims of the Holocaust forgive Nazis. We love stories about victims of Black church shootings forgiving the white shooter. I think, if the people in those stories feel good about their act of forgiveness, again, we don't have the right to say to them, you shouldn't forgive them. But why do we love reading these stories so much? I think that's worth examining, because a lot of times it tends to reinforce the status quo and existing power structures in ways that are not healthy for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's so many of these examples are about, whose comfort are you concerned about, right? Is it
Correct.
sort of about
Correct.
centering the perpetrator's comfort? Is it about giving people even just sort of more generally a sense that, well, if we can forgive Nazis for the Holocaust, then I certainly don't have anything to feel guilty about, right? There's sort of a sense that
right.
it
Anti-Semitism is over.
right, or it just kind of creates a sense of everything's kind of okay, or anything I do doesn't really have lasting consequences.
Right. Well said.
And and I think there is so much about our culture that is uncomfortable with being with discomfort and trying to kind of smooth things over and tell everybody things will be okay, it's fine, and you don't need to sit with the things that are hard.
Yes. And sitting with things that are hard is really important. And if you do it, you will feel proud of yourself for doing it. It's uncomfortable work, but it is work that will make you feel like, I did good there. I did the work. I think we all know in our heart of hearts when we're not doing the work.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned Harvey Weinstein briefly. How do you, with the lens of Sorry Watch, think about where we are with the Me Too movement? Just
Again,
a small question.
teeny question. There are always going to be power imbalances. It's funny. I just read, one of the things we made fun of on Sorry Watch was Andrew Cuomo's successive terrible apologies for, again, that's just a bad apology bingo card of I'm just friendly, I'm exuberant, sometimes, misconstrued. There are always and now there was just a story about a reporter to whom Cuomo's chief of staff, I think, complained, who then hit on her. It's always, I don't think, unfortunately, we're never going to solve Me Too. However, we can have a culture where there are consequences. And I think we are, we do evolve, the Tony Kushner line about the earth only spins forward. Hopefully we grow, we change, we learn. We have gotten better in so many ways about seeing where stuff that was once considered acceptable, or boys being boys, is no longer seen as acceptable. So I do think we do need to take time to sort of sit to celebrate the victories and not just bemoan how far we still have to go.
Yeah. And it is interesting to see sort of where people have become more sensitive to the issues with how lame some apologies are. It is very striking now in ways that I think probably weren't a decade or so ago.
Yes, I saw it makes the rounds now every Halloween, but there's a kid in a Halloween costume that is an Instagram apology, and he's just a YouTube apology, and he's made a screen around himself, and he's in the screen with these tissues like wiping his face, and all of the text is all about, hey guys, I just wanted to talk to you myself about this, blah 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 blah, and click here to like, click here to save, click here to buy my product. And I think it's now like 3 or 4 years old, but we all recognize the terrible celebrity apology when we hear one. It was convenient while I was, out doing the apology speech rounds for the high holidays, that Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis apology came out for them writing the letter in support of their friend and former coworker Danny Masterson, who was convicted of drugging and raping 2 women that we know of, and their whole thing was, it was like a minute and a half, and it was like 8 million. If you haven't seen it, I heartily recommend you Google. Ashton
It's extremely weird, actually.
It's so weird, but it's all, we were asked by his family to write these letters, and we always support victims in this letter where you're saying to the judge, give him a more lenient sentence. And this letter was really for the judge. It wasn't, you guys weren't supposed to see it. That was the subtext. It was just this litany of horrible, but then again, people made fun of Drew Barrymore for her terrible apology for wanting to go back to work. And she listened, and she didn't cross the picket line. And so that's, and yeah.
Learning can happen.
Learning can happen, even for celebrities.
Right.
Wild.
Though I was shocked, I saw in the book that I hadn't seen this particular, maybe I just blocked it out because it was too annoying, but that in 2018, when Clinton was interviewed about whether he'd ever apologized to Monica Lewinsky, he was like, well, I apologize to everyone. And he didn't seem to understand that, like, there actually might be a reason to apologize to the person whose life he actually ruined.
Yes, and he ended up yelling at the journalist for not dropping it.
Right.
But then again, Clinton gave a great apology for the Tuskegee experiment.
Right.
And that was a governmental institutional apology for a terrible chapter in American history. And he did all the 6 steps about, saying he was sorry, apologizing on behalf of the office and of the country, setting up a fellowship at the CDC for Black epidemiologists, creating a monument. So they funded a museum. I mean, it was all, again, we all contain multitudes. His personal apology was crap, but his apology for a collective action was very, very good. I wanted to just share, I was thinking about I wanted to share one more really good apology. Yeah. Since so one of my favorite examples of a really good apology was a historical museum in Ohio that was hosting a wedding after hours, and there was a woman breastfeeding her kid in the museum, and the security guards came up and told her she couldn't do that. Wouldn't she be more comfortable no, she wouldn't. She knew that she was doing something that was a federally as well as, I believe, state protected act, and they very much insisted that she leave. She posted about it on Facebook. The museum reached out to her. And they did it privately and publicly, which is an important thing for an institutional apology. They said they were sorry. They said what they were sorry for, rather than, the events of last Tuesday. They showed that they understood why it was harmful. They brought in a breastfeeding advocacy organization to talk to the whole staff, not just the security guards. I forget if they were fired or just reprimanded, but the security guards were, there was consequences for them. And then my favorite thing in terms of both reparations and really turning something into a teachable moment was they did an exhibit of, again, this is a historical museum. So they did an exhibit of clothing worn by breastfeeding mothers in Ohio throughout history.
How
Um,
cool.
and like, what a great way to make a bad thing into a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, that is great. Um, and it shows like real learning
Yeah.
and yeah. I think also when the other example I loved from your book was about OB tampons when they tried to get rid of their ultra size. Um, and I thought that, which was such a case of like people have it like listening to their consumers and then having a sense of humor about it, right?
A
As to
sense of humor goes so
so
far.
far.
So yeah, they pulled the biggest size tampon from shelves, and people were really mad and upset about the loss of this tampon, as and who wouldn't be. So they made, and this was mid-aughts, so sort of early in when YouTube could personalize things. So you could put in your name into a YouTube thing, and then this like, unthreateningly hot teen idol like white man playing a beautiful baby grand piano like on a Hawaiian beach sang a song of apology to you. And talked about, we understand that we did a bad thing, and it just kept repeating your name. And then in the end, there was a coupon code for, getting a discount on the tampon that they were bringing back. We're so used to making fun of companies for terror, or not even making fun of, but being really mad at companies like United's apology when they dragged that elderly man off the plane for not giving up his seat voluntarily, even though he had paid for his seat. And here you have an old man being dragged down the middle of a plane aisle while everybody's filming on their phones, and there's blood running down his face, and he broke his nose and he lost teeth. And they blamed him for, the unfortunate like deplaning situation. Or when somebody starts a Twitter account called United Apologizes that consists of memes about old people being thrown downstairs, you have not apologized well.
No.
No.
You do in the book give some reasons not to apologize. I think you give at least 4 reasons. So what are some reasons why maybe might be wrong to apologize?
Right. Don't apologize if you're not sorry. A lot of the terrible apologies that we hear, and that are because the person is clearly just wanting to make this situation go away. You may want to talk to somebody else about whether you should apologize, but particularly for public apologies, you will prolong the bad if you apologize badly. Also, when it comes to, say, apologies in medicine, an apology that takes no responsibility makes people angrier, and people are more likely to sue if they get we regret that your feelings, that we regret the situation in which pain was caused to you. And jury verdicts tend to be larger. The Harvard hospital system did a really, really smart and well-written report encouraging doctors to apologize, despite that being, to apologize well and say, people want to know that their pain meant something. So tell them what happened, tell them what steps you're taking to make sure it doesn't happen again. And make it a teachable, again, making it a teachable moment makes it better. And I forget now which Scandinavian country, that's what they do. They're taught how to do this, and they offer a sum of money right in the room. And it's a small sum, but it makes people, again, feel heard. So don't apologize if you're not sorry. Don't apologize if the other person, this is what we learned from Harriet Lerner, if a couple, say, has experienced infidelity and they've gone through therapy together to deal with the infidelity, if every time the couple fights, the person who was cheated on like waves the infidelity in the other person's face, they should not be apologizing for that anymore. Once you have processed a thing, you don't get to keep on bringing it up as a way to end an argument. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah,
You mentioned one before of like, you don't want to trap someone into an apology. So like
yes.
if someone doesn't want to hear from you, you don't need to approach them.
Right.
I mean,
And
you
if
should not
somebody is
approach them in
backing
that moment.
away, don't pursue them. A lot of times, to their credit, people who are newly in recovery want to reach out to people who they've harmed in their past to apologize. And that's a time for a letter, not picking up the phone, not, asking to meet them, because you have to accept the notion that you won't be forgiven. And if you're not forgiven, the Maimonides thing is try 3 times. And that may well be true. If you've apologized, if you've tried 3 times, well, but then you got to let it go. You have to sit with it.
One caveat to the first example of not apologizing if you're not actually sorry is the question of what we tell our kids to do if our kids might not be sorry, but we might push them to apologize.
Yes. Yes, that is from the chapter called I'm Sorry I Chased You with a Booger, which is about teaching kids to apologize. And in the beginning, little children don't understand why they should wash their hands after they poop. We make them do it anyway. You don't know how to tie your shoes when you're little. The only way you learn to tie your shoes is by tying your shoes and practicing and getting it wrong. Apology is a muscle, and you teach a kid to develop a muscle. It is hard, though, because a lot of us, we didn't see good apologies modeled for us. We and it's not it I like, my kids went to schools that use this program, the responsive classroom, and there are often signs that I love that are up in the classroom that teach kids how to apologize. And almost all the steps are great, except till they get to the last one, which is always ask, will you forgive me? And then we're like, no, because forgiveness is a gift to be granted. And you don't ask for a gift. I mean, just ask Miss Manners. That is rude to ask for a gift. You can say, I hope one day you can forgive me, or I hope I can earn your forgiveness. But saying, will you forgive me, just bats it back into the other person's corner and puts you on the same level. And then that person's a jerk if they say no, which is not playing fair.
Right. Some of the most hopeful stories in the book, or most sort of inspiring stories in the book, I thought were stories about apologies that came out of the blue many years later. And it was such an important reminder that, like, it's never too late to apologize, and that actually it's usually appreciated. And,
Yes.
that's not something I think most of us are encouraged to do or even to think about. So I thought that was really.
It's so true. And we tend, the last chapter looks at what we call apology adjacent behaviors, which are things that are like apology, have huge impacts and a huge power to make people feel good. And one of them is writing a personal letter. Another is sending a thank you note. A lot of times, both my co-author Susan and I, we both have stories of people apologizing to us for things that we had forgotten about, or things that happened so long ago, but that the other person hadn't forgotten. And it was so meaningful to get those apologies because we know how hard they are to deliver. And it is a wonderful thing to have the power to say to someone, thank you so much for doing that. I know that was difficult, and I forgive you. And I really thank you for that apology.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Marjorie, for being with us tonight and for teaching us more about apologies. And I love the way you frame apologies as part of the way that we make the world feel, kinder and more connected. And I think we need that so much right now.
Agreed.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It was really fun. As always, I also want to direct people to more to explore at JWA. We'll put some links in the chat. Last fall, we did a book talk with Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg on her book on repentance and repair. So that's another place you can go to.
Yes, which is great.
A great book, learn more about apologies. I wanted to share also an essay by one of our Teen Rising Voices fellows about what she learned about tshuva from the children's book Lily's Plastic Purse, which I know is a favorite of Marjorie's as well.
Yes. I was thinking about that as a Halloween costume.
Ooh, that would be a good one.
Mouse ears, the little crown, little red boots.
Exactly.
Yeah. Such a good book.
You can read more about the case of Bertha Rayner Frank that we talked about from 1907. If you are looking for content that speaks to this particular moment in Israel, check out our podcast, Can We Talk? We've released 2 special episodes in the last few weeks. As I said at the beginning, this is our last book talk of our fall series, but have no fear. We have a new series of virtual programs beginning in November. This will be a history course on Jewish women in the medieval world, which we are holding not Thursday night, so mark your calendars. It will be Thursday at noon Eastern time, starting November 2nd. So I hope to see many of you there. You can learn more and register at the link in the chat, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email with the recording. For those of you in the Boston area, which I know is not very many of you, but please give me the permission to speak to the Boston peeps. We have an in-person program on Wednesday, November 1st at 7 p.m. on our shared campus at Hebrew College. It is called Woman Rabbi History Maker, Tracing Religious Leadership Through Life Stories. And this is a launch event for our oral history collection, which is now online. You can see more at our events page. And most of all, I just want to thank everybody for being with us tonight. As I said at the beginning, this is a hard time, and there is nothing, for me at least, that helps more than engaging with people in meaningful ways. So I'm wishing all of us better times for us to connect, wishing us all good apologies, more peaceful times, and until next time, be well.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thanks, Marjorie.